So, welcome everyone to this experiment in storytelling. There's a local group called Story Matters, and we decided last May we wanted to do something public and something for the community. And what very quickly evolved was, let's do a storytelling event in downtown Middlebury about downtown Middlebury, and it will be a bridge, but not those kind of bridges. It will be a bridge between the past, what downtown Middlebury was, and a bridge to the future, what downtown Middlebury will be. One of the things that we've learned in this process, I guess I'm not on, but I will talk loudly, is that downtown Middlebury has not been static. It is not the way it was 25 years ago, nor 40 years ago, or 60 years ago. It is constantly in transformative work in progress. And it will continue that arc into the future. So we don't know what it will be like in 5 years, but it will be as wonderful as it has ever been. There's a small committee that has organized this, so I just want to identify the people on that committee. Lynn Rowell, Dorothea Langevin, Mark Wilch, Barbara Doyle Wilch, Dick Thodal, and Cliff Adams, who's not here tonight. We want to thank our partners, without whom we couldn't have done this. Our biggest partner was Bundle, and Kelly has been immensely helpful in our being able to do this. We also have a partnership with the Ilsley Library and the Sheldon Museum, who have provided these images that Dorothea has gathered, and the Vermont Folklife Center, and Middlebury Community Television. So MCTV is taping this so it can be shown on the MCTV channel and website into eternity at any time, day or night. You can watch, rewatch. But because they're taping, there's a few things that are really important. One is that background noise be a minimum, so make sure your cell phones are off, and that's why the air conditioning has been turned off. Storytellers will use this microphone because it's the sound part of the taping that MCTV is doing. So it's not an option. You have to use the microphone, and be sure to hold the microphone close to your mouth, as I am. Otherwise, it won't pick up your story. I think that's all I needed to say about the taping. We're going to do our stories in sort of three tiers. There are some of you who have indicated a few days ago or a couple of weeks ago that you would like to tell a story. So those will be our first storytellers. Then a few of you have come in or will raise your hand and let us know who you are. If you have one of those cards, you can write your name down on it and pass it forward or hold it up in the air and somebody will come get it. Then we will have you be our next storytellers. And then there will likely be a time at the very end for spontaneous stories, because I guarantee that some of you will hear something that will trigger, oh my gosh, I remember going into Mike Lazarus' Five and Dime, and this is what happened when I went there. So be prepared that you will likely have stories bubbling up. Anything else I need to say or any questions? I'm going to turn the mic over to our hosts this evening, Amy Ryan and Dick Thodal.
Well, we had a great first session this afternoon. Is this one not working? Yeah. Okay.
We're mic'd.
Okay. So we had a great first session this afternoon. And one of the reasons I think that that things got rolling so well was that Hudson Tilford gave a really great intro of some of the downtown businesses. So I'm going to ask him to do that, but first, I had another suggestion from somebody. How many people have been here for 100 years? You may feel like it. How about 90? How about 80? How about 70? Okay, now we're getting somewhere. And 60? 50? 40? 30? 20? 10? 0? So that's good. We've got a really great cross section of people here. So I'm going to ask Hudson to come up and give his recollections.
So the walking tour format has a starting up by the monument by the Town Hall Theater, which in earlier incarnations was the Town Hall Theater. They had the town meeting there a day a year, and then it was a movie theater, a bad movie theater. The equipment broke, there's lots of rowdiness, and while I wasn't there for this, I heard about one of my brother's friends making retching noises and pouring soup on the people from the balcony. It then became the Belmont Restaurant, and then the Knights of Columbus, and back to the Town Hall Theater again. Next we have the diner, now part of the Town Hall Theater. It was a meeting place and a good place to hang out after school. Remember, Tommy Rule had his feet out in the aisle, and the gentleman told him to move him, and Tommy gave him some mouth and asked him if he owned the place. And as it happened, he did, and that did not go well for Tom. Going across the bridge to be replaced, or one of them, was Giro's Plumbing and Heating, and then there was Abrams and Lazar and Lockwood's, and I vaguely remember the First National being on that corner, but it was the ski house for a lot of years. And this gentleman predated me a little bit, but I heard many stories of Johnny Kenworthy, who maintained the boilers in the Battelle block. Johnny had been gassed in World War II, and, World War I, and, he had been gassed in World War I explains a lot. There was a semi-annual cleaning where they could tackle him, take off his coveralls, blast him with a fire hose, and scrub him with scrub brushes, and that would be good for another 6 months. He is credited with standing on the corner and somebody saying to him, "Boy, there's a lot of strange people in Middlebury." And his answer was, "No, don't you worry, none. They all go home after Labor Day." And if you walk across the park a little bit and across the other bridge to be replaced, you would come to Stan Lazarus's clothing store. Stan was a prince. If somebody needed clothes and couldn't pay for them, he'd throw the slips away. He was just that kind of a guy. And he was a Democrat in Vermont a long time before it was trendy. Mike Lazarus's store was next door. He had everything. You could find anything. When they closed it up, I had somebody ask me, "Is it true that they found Amelia Earhart and Judge Crater in the cellar?" I had the honor of being the best man at a wedding next to the thread counter. For $15, Mike threw in a copy of the ceremony in a plastic wrapper. Then come to the National Bank that was run by Phil Hinks for many years. And when I was a teenager, Phil gave me a ride hitchhiking from Bristol to Middlebury. And he knew the family, and he was chatting me up, and he got me to talking about my father's expansion of his business from fishing tackle into bait as well. And my father went to get a business loan from the National Bank and had a presentation of his business. And Phil said, "You don't need to give me that. I gave Hudson a ride the other day." Then the Vermont bookstore, what can you say about it? It's a fixture. It's been here forever, and I expect it'll stay there. There were two drugstores, the Park Drug and the Rex, so that kind of surrounded Calvi's. I didn't do much with Calvi's, but my brother-in-law from Boston enjoyed going in, getting a cup of coffee and reading the paper. And Mary would always say, "Who are you?" And the answer, Arch Tilford's son-in-law, got him admission. And across the bridge was Farrell's, the Grace Shop, and Ruby Rogers' toy store. Later, the toy store later became the Rosebud Cafe, which was made locally famous by a combination of cops and cookies. If you weren't in town at that point, the cops came in to a Christmas party to break up a situation, and there were brownies on the table, and nobody there dared to say to them, "You don't want one of those cookies." They'd been called away from their dinner to make this call and had missed out on dessert. So I never saw one, but I heard there was a bumper sticker that said, "Welcome to Middlebury, please don't feed the cops." And on the other side of the street was the Midway Hobby Shop. If you were into flying model airplanes or putting models together, they took very good care of people. And the VFW was underneath, and then down Bakery Lane was the bakery run by Steve Baker. And the next block was the Ben Franklin. And it's sad that that's gone. But because lots and lots of little kids, including my own and my nieces and nephews, just loved to go in there with whatever a reasonable amount of cash was at that point in time and find a toy. On the block across the street, I couldn't remember, but I had it explained to me that where Fourth and Goal was I think a Pete Emelo's store and an IGA beside it. And behind that was the Star Mill, owned by Chief of Police Don Williamson. The bowling alley was downstairs, and the pool room was upstairs. I misspent many hours trying to master the pool table and never did. Later, the Alibi was in the building, and the tale I remember most hearing about on that was for St. Patrick's Day, they had Finnegan's Wake. A casket was put on the bar, and you could sit in the casket and drink beer, and at closing time, they'd shut it on John Reynolds and carry him out. Store 2 was at 2 Park Street, and if you wanted a nice gift, that was the place to get it. The Benjamin block held Egan's drugstore on the left and Benjamin Cleaners on the right, and Ed Center and Bud Lundgren cut hair upstairs. So now I've taken you across downtown. There's a few holes in it that I had pointed out to me that I missed, that I've let other people fill in, but that's my start.
Thanks, Hudson. As I was introduced to Hudson earlier today, I told him he's one of the names I've heard for years, my 20 years here in Middlebury, and finally could put a face with the name. So now I know where to go to fill in those other blanks. One of our next storytellers is Ann Webster, and you probably all have seen Ann at the town clerk's office or out and about and around town. I got to know Ann over the course of my career in Middlebury, and she knows more than anybody else who I've ever asked questions to. So I will hand the floor over to Ann for her story.
Well, I knew Hudson was going to be a hard act to follow. That was great, thanks. So, when I was asked to do back in the day, I thought, wow, I feel like I've arrived back in the day. Back in the day. Like, okay, so, well, I actually live in the same house where I grew up on Washington Street, and I attended St. Mary's School on Shannon Street. At that time, there were no traffic lights in town, so, as you mentioned, Chief of Police Don Williamson, he directed traffic every morning and helped all the kids walking to school cross the road at the corner of Main Street and Merchants Row. And of course, we had to take our lives into our hands to first cross Route 7 at Court Street in front of the old courthouse. The traffic was nothing like today, but with no stoplights, we would have to watch very carefully, and then we would scoot halfway across where there was a sort of meridian, and then we'd watch very carefully and scoot across again. And there was a grocery store on the corner, which I think Hudson mentioned, and it was the First National. And Hudson said he remembers 3 pharmacies in town, so he's maybe a decade older than me. So I remember 2. And there was the Rexall, and there was the Park Drug. And the Rexall took up quite a bit of Main Street. It was quite a large enterprise. And I was particularly fond of the Rexall because they had a soda fountain in the rear of the store. And there was a lovely woman named Marion Vincent who worked there. And I frequently stopped in on my way home from school. And Mrs. Vincent never passed judgment on me when I ordered a sundae that was bigger than any first or second grader should ever have in front of them. I would order a brown derby, which was a big old homemade donut with a nice round scoop of vanilla ice cream in the center. You smother that in chocolate sauce, and it looked just like a brown derby hat. And of course, adding whipped cream and a bright red cherry did not add to the hat theme, but as most youngsters, I had a pretty good imagination. So downtown also had Farrell's, a clothing store for men. Women had many more shops that carried women's clothing, including upstairs in Ben Franklin. In its heyday, Ben Franklin sold just about anything you might ever need on the first floor. The second floor was all clothing, and I loved to go up there with my Aunt Betty. She loved clothes, and they always had something she wanted to buy. The basement room in Ben Franklin was one of the only toy stores I actually remember being in town. And there was a restaurant on Main Street, which I think was called Jimmy's. It was owned by Jimmy Fusilli and his wife Bernice. They probably served some Italian items, as I remember stories about the great meatballs. And Bernice eventually opened a jewelry store, and that woman would help me fix or untangle any mass of chains that I would take to her. It didn't matter that I had not purchased my children's junk jewelry from her shop. She treated every piece like it was a fine piece of jewelry. There was also one of the best bakeries. The owner, I remember, was Jimmy Costello. I think it was called the Bakery Lane Bakery. And so that's a little after the time you were talking about, too, that same bakery. And I think Jimmy is the one who eventually moved the business to Washington Street, where Rubright still run a bakery. The bakery always smelled terrific. They had the best donuts, and during any holiday, they had sugar cookies decorated in bright color frosting, honoring the current festivities. And on a Friday, they always had a big stone crockery pot full of baked beans. And I liked their baked beans better than my mother's baked beans. So on Friday nights, everyone was downtown, every Friday. Families did their grocery shopping, picked up prescriptions, had dinner, got ice cream, and if we were lucky, which we usually were, there was roller skating going on in the gymnasium. And I remember 9 p.m. was closing time for most businesses. That was also curfew time. Every night at 8:45 p.m., the fire alarm would go off to test the alarm and to signal all youth old enough to be out without their parents that it was time to head home. And that's it.
Can you imagine? Thanks, Anne. Great.
In the summer of 1962, I was 14 years old, and I had a job at, well, a lot of you remember Paul Steel Mobile, and then before Paul Steel Mobile, Ted Novak had the mobile station, and before that, it was Buddy Butterfield's, and that building was a yellow wood building right where the roundabout is now. And I worked that summer, and I worked half for Horace Loomis, who managed it, who was the most honest person in the world, and half for a mechanic I won't name, who was the most crooked person in the world. But that was right across from another real busy part of town. There was another gas station, there was Moose's, and then in the Benjamin Brothers dry cleaning building, there was also Egan's, Jim Egan's father's store, so I'd like to ask Jim to come up and fill in some details.
That's a good segue.
I was talking to my cousin Trudy. They're doing the films of Tommy's wedding, and your Trudy and your interaction is a major feature in that wedding. Yes. I'm Jimmy Egan. I'm now Jim Egan, but when I grew up on Main Street, I grew up right across the street from right where the bridge was, and I lived there for 6 years. So when I lived there were events that were really pretty special. One of them was when Norwich would come to play football at Middlebury College. They would come in by train, and of course the kids would go down there and we'd heckle them, and then they would march through the town in formation and go up to the football field, and they'd play their football game. Well, it was the first weekend the college kids, the cadets, were off campus. So they had been locked up for 6-7 weeks. And usually the upperclassmen would give them beer, they'd get drunk. Then at the end of the game, they would tear the goalposts down, carry them through town, and the commandant would be hitting them on the head with a program, yelling at them, and they'd have to report to his office. So that was a big event. One of the people that was really special in our lives, in our generation, was Stub Mackey. Stub Mackey is Peter Mackey, Neil Mackey, and Rick Mackey's dad. He ran the summer programs in Middlebury. They started up at Twilight Field, which is in back of the old elementary school. We played softball. I don't think there was much else we did. We played softball, and then we would come back later after we went home and ride the swim bus down to the lake. And Stub would drive the bus to the lake. Then he would teach the lesson. Then he would load 50 kids on the bus, bring them back, let us off, and that was our summer programs in Middlebury. One of the other real neat programs that Stub did, Stub in the winter ran the ski bus up to the Snow Bowl, which used to be run by Chet Brush. And he started the bus, and then Stub took it over. And Stub would be on top, and you'd hand your skis up to him. Well, for 25 cents, your mother got you out of the house at really early, because the bus left at 8:30. So you were out of the house by 8 o'clock. You went there, and you got home at 5 o'clock. For 25 cents, your mother got rid of you. The season ticket was $25 for the winter, and that was your Christmas present. You got the season ticket. Stub Mackey was such a wonderful person, it's kind of scary how good he was. He would then not only drive us to the mountain, he would time our races, our Mid-Vermont ski races, and he would help chart them so we know if we made the race team the next weekend. Linda Andrews, who spoke here earlier, was the first girl to make the ski team, travel team. But she did not make the tough thing was you had to eat a pig's dinner at Seward's. And Linda would not eat the pig's dinner, so she really kind of didn't get accepted totally the whole way. But she was there, and she was the first girl to make the team. Then my cousin Trudy made the team, and then Sue Potter eventually would make the team. But they really, it was funny because it was just flat. You went down to Proctor, and whoever time, there was 8 people would make the team. 6 would race, and 2 were alternates. Alternates just went there and skied. And it was a lot of fun, and that's where it was. But they didn't have girls' divisions then and boys' division. It was one division in mid-Vermont. One of the other things that I remember as a kid growing up, I grew up right on the main street. I remember the fire when the school burned down. And my sister and I was talking to my sister about it the other day. My sister Judy she graduated in '61. And she remembers the fire because her roommate was Joan Murray, who was the older sister of Ronnie Murray, who drives a bus for Otter Creek, the lodge at Otter Creek. Well, Hod Murray was on the fire department, and he broke his ankle hooking the hose up, according to my sister, because it was quite a fire. I mean, it was just, it just was huge. And we all, back then you could go to the fires. We all went up and watched the fires go apart, and the firemen, they drank coffee all during the fire, but they really worked hard. I mean, they were drinking, and they had this thing, and we're all sitting there wondering, how could they fight the fire and come over and have a cup of coffee and it's still blowing? The Beth Call father was a fire chief, and Beth Call now works in the town clerk's office, and I think her name is Beth Dow. Yeah, and her dad was a fire chief, and she said she was always angry that her father was such a good fireman, and he saved that building because her career was spent in a building that should have been torn down earlier. And she said to me, I really wish my father wasn't such a good fireman, but he saved that building, and it was remarkable. And the next year, the college kids, the high school kids went up to the college. They gave them rooms up there for classes, and there was a baseball player. His name was John Newseeder, and he was a tremendous baseball. He got a major league tryout, but he didn't want to leave town to go to the tryout, and he would not walk up to the college, so he never finished high school. And the reason he didn't finish high school, he didn't want to walk up on the college campus. So, he ended up being a railroad or a road director for Salisbury. Some other things, the fire was pretty important. And then Arthur Healy was my father's drinking buddy. And I remember Arthur Healy setting up they used to draw, the races every Saturday afternoon were on television. And Arthur Healy would run a pool out of my father's store. And they'd draw the names out of the hats, and then they would get number 5 or number 6. And then he would come down to my house, and my father and he would sit and drink and watch the horse racing show. Also, at that time in our lives, there wasn't a building you went in that people weren't smoking. It was awful. I mean, we all should have black lung disease because we all grew up with people smoking, blowing smoke in your face. And now we don't see that. So our society's gotten much better about it. And when you look back on it, there were 2 dentists when I was a little boy. Dr. Bentley was across the street, and Dr. Murray, Hod Murray's dad, was over here. And if you went to him, he gave you a certificate to go downstairs and get a hot fudge sundae after you had your dentist appointment. So he had quite a following for kids. And Dr. Bentley didn't do that. He just got to leave. Well, anyway, that was my experience in Middlebury. And the hurricane of, I think it was 50, I can remember when there were a whole bunch of trees in back of the library, and they all fell down. And as kids, we loved it because he never chopped them up. We just used them as climb. It was our jungle gym, was that area. And when you walked through Middlebury, it was all there, trees all over, and it was really a mess. And Frank Lampshire also, who had I don't think he could spell very well, and he would be the one that would put the thing up over the campus movie theater. And the college kids used to laugh at him because he'd give them a note, and he'd try it, and they'd kind of screw it up, and he always had the names misspelled. I mean, this poor man was just and if you died, it cost you $60 because I think he charged them $60 to dig your graves, and he dug all the graves up there at the field across from the college. And as kids, we went to the hockey games, and the hockey games were always fun because you tried to steal a hockey player's sticks after the game, and they were going out and you said, "Can I have your stick? Can I have your stick?" And I got the greatest stick of all, Phil Lattre's stick. And that was a big deal because he was quite a hockey player, and that was that. And Kristen didn't take credit. Her father built the diner, and it was her dad that built the diner. And Kristen didn't take credit for that, and her dad ate at the diner, and he said, "I built this building," and he was the one that built the diner.
So on the theme of downtown businesses from that day, Dave, anything you want to say on the market? Or
Well, market.
come on up if this is Dave Doria. He's from the.
I was young then. The college took the building over when I was
just to fill everybody in.
12.
It's
It
where
was-
Schaefer's is now. Where was Doria's?
No,
Oh,
wasn't. It was like the book that's out in town, it says it's down where it is now. It was the next building down from Otter Creek Bakery.
oh, that okay. Yeah.
And
right. Okay.
it was, our store was on one side and Paul De Palma's shoe store was on the other side. In the center door, you went upstairs for the apartments. And I was 12, I think, when the college didn't renew the lease, so we had to leave the store. And that same year is when Sam Emilo started the store where it is now, where Schaefer's is, but that store had a soda fountain in it, which was pretty fun as a kid growing up. Just walk in and help yourself at a soda fountain. Sunday papers then, that was a big deal. New York Times was about 2.5 inches thick, and it came in probably 40 sections, all apart, and you had to put them together. All the major papers were like that. You got this big mound, and we'd have these assembly lines and put the papers together before people started showing up at 7 in the morning. So it was early morning, put papers together every Sunday. I know it was quite a beer business from the college because not very many students had cars then, so they walked down. So you'd see these caravans of college students heading back up to the college with kegs over their shoulders, and I guess they were stronger then. But yeah, that's about what I remember.
Mark's got a story? Oh, this is a card from somebody who does. David Weinstock.
Right here?
Yep. Or you sit, stand,
That sounds
whatever.
good. In the earlier session today, a lot of people's talks revolved around local landmarks and local businesses, and I thought that was a good idea, so I made a list of the ones that were important to me. And you're going to hear about the Middlebury Inn, Mead Chapel, Happy Valley Road, the Vermont Bookshop, and a country church, country graveyard. I'm not a Vermonter. I wasn't born here. Apparently, you have to be born here at least 7 generations ago to be a Vermonter, but I married into Vermont. And you may not think of Middlebury as a honeymoon destination, but this is actually where we came for our honeymoon. It was in December of 1984, and we had some other plan to go to Quebec, but the car broke down, and then And then there was terrible weather, so we said, we'll just go to Middlebury. My wife had gone to college here. Her father had gone to college here, so she knew the town. So we came and we went to the Middlebury Inn. And it was a lovely room and a 4-poster bed and good food and all. But the thing I remember most was that Middlebury Inn was the first place that I ever said the words, my wife. I was at the desk, I was getting my keys, and I said, and I need a set for my wife. And I just never forgot that moment. And then I keep being reminded of that moment because as the years go on, people got to be wives who weren't before. So I've had gay friends say my wife, I've had trans friends say my wife, and that's something about Vermont that I kind of like. On our honeymoon, we went down to Mead Chapel. This was the Christmas season. So we went to the Lessons and Carols concert at the chapel, which was a beautiful thing. So when I say I married into Vermont, I also married into Christmas, which I never had before. And I really dig Christmas. My wife, though, had Christmas all her life, and she was done with it. She was tired of it. But I thought, wow, Christmas, with trees, the presents, we had a completely Christmas-free childhood, and all of a sudden we had that. So Mead Chapel was Christmas carols and lessons and things. So we went back to Boston and lived there for a while, and my wife got into higher ed fundraising, and she worked for Wellesley College, and then we went to Colby College. Well, if you're in higher ed fundraising, eventually your alma mater hears about you and they say, come on back, work here. And so she did, and we did. So we moved here. It was sort of a quick move, and it was a little disconcerting. And I remember being told we were going to live in a rented house on Happy Valley Road. And that sounded so perky, it made me nervous. I was working at LL Bean there, writing the LL Bean catalog. And I said to one of the other writers, I said, Happy Valley Road, that's weird. And she said, well, that's better than Depressed Ravine Boulevard. So anyway, we live there. Happy Valley Road is way out, there. And I'll tell you how out of the way it is. At Halloween, if you wanted trick-or-treaters to come to your house, you had to kind of make an appointment. You'd call their parents and say, could you bring... So later we moved to the Woodland, to the Budolph Acres area, where you get hundreds of kids. When our kids were young, we loved that. Now we just turn off the lights and hide. So here we were in Vermont, and you remember the TV show Cheers? Right, so they had a theme song, and part of the theme song said, don't you want to go where everybody knows your name? I'd never lived in a place quite like this before. Eventually, everybody here knows your name, and if you run into someone in the store, you know them, or you know their kid, or you know their wife. So the Vermont Bookshop was one of the places that I went to a lot in town, and they, after a while, knew my name. And one of the first things I found out about the Vermont Bookshop was that Robert Frost had shopped for books there. And when I first heard that, I thought, oh, Robert Frost, he was famous. Of course, they remember him. As I went on through living in Vermont for a while, I realized that they knew the names of all their customers, and they knew who they were. Robert Frost was just another local poet, like me. And it was, I eventually got to read my poems at the Vermont Bookshop, and it's a local institution of the sort that I hadn't had before anywhere. My wife's family were Vermonters from way, way, way back. They came here from Connecticut in the 18th century, and so they have a genealogy. And my immigrant parents came in 1910, and they didn't want to talk about the old country. They didn't want to think about the old country. They left for good reasons. So we don't have, 8 volumes of genealogy. So that was another one of the cool things I married into. And the day that I realized how totally I had married into Vermont was we were in Waitsfield, in a country graveyard where my wife's father and lots of other family members are buried. And we brought flowers and we were walking around. And my wife said, and you'll be over there. So I guess I'm a Vermonter now.
Or you will be. So David's story reminds me that we should have a story about the origin of street names. If your wife had said you were moving to States Prison Hollow Road in Moncton, you probably wouldn't have been here tonight to tell that story. It's funny, as these stories get told, I keep thinking of correlations between what was and what is now and what the future holds for Middlebury. And it's pretty exciting. I've only been here for just about 20 years. And the changes just on Main Street alone in the composition of the stores and the merchants and the people that I meet and interact with on a daily basis, it's pretty dramatic, actually, in just 20 years. So I appreciate the history being honored tonight. It's pretty neat.
I know, Liane, you would talk to somebody about maybe saying something. Would you like to?
Another lifer?
Yes. Quite a lot of history. Ooh, I'm going to sit down. That's a great idea. Makes it even better. I'm Liane Bicknell Barrera, and I am a Vermonter through and through. For many, well, I was told that I was related to Pocahontas. That's what my father told me. So, and at Halloween, when I had long hair and wore braids down here, my cheekbones did stick up. So I guess I am a Vermonter. So, I was here at the 3:30 session, and it was wonderful. You gave a marvelous description of what the town looked like. So as I thought about it, there were things that I remembered, and my husband also happened to grow up here. And I said, well, I'm not sure about that. So there were some things that I mentioned. So I don't know what happened. I'm sorry I was late, but I had to go home and eat some food before I came back. But thinking way back, okay, Doria's, I'm glad that got recorrected, because if you start way back where Doria's was, which is where Schaefer's is now, and that became Lion's Place, and then it became, was it Dada's, or what was it down? Baba's. The Dadas and the Babas got all mixed up in my life. I always thought that was really funny. And then as we move up the street, De Palma's shoe store was in the building that the college built, and you just went in there and you had leather put back on your shoes or whatever you want. It was wonderful. And then Sam's Emilo's Market, that was there. So, and then Otter Creek Bakery was a gas station. And it's hard to imagine that. And I remember thinking, that's a great location. Something's got to come in there. And thank God it was Otter Creek Bakery. To me, that's been a lifesaver in this town. Really good bread. But it was also a gathering place when it was Moose's place. Moose Provencio was the proprietor there. So then as we move up the street, where the Folklife Center is now, and I don't know if I have history right or not, but I do remember as a small, well, probably middle school child, going into the basement of that brick building. And I was brought to the lower level, and I looked down into a large hole and was told that the Underground Railroad, this was one of the spots here. And as I left, somebody said, oh no, there was no Underground Railroad in Vermont. So I think we need to clear all that up. But the other thing that they told me, if you look at the front of the Folklife Center and the brick, and then you look at the side that it would have been Provencher's or Otter Creek, they are two different patterns there. And so people coming through would know that that was a safe space. That's the story I've been told. If it's real or not, I don't know. But I think it was interesting. So then, yeah, then as we move up the street, we came to Egan's drugstore and soda fountain, and then it seems like there was a dry cleaner there too. At some point in Benjamin's Dry Cleaners was the next story. I love this your story about Mr. Egan sleeping, moving next door and sleeping in. Anyway, there are all kinds of stories that probably shouldn't be told, but so, and then coming further up town, I don't know if anybody's mentioned it tonight, but that the first fire station was in Cannon Park.
I had
Yeah, Rick Cole mentioned that earlier
I
today. Yeah.
had no idea that, but it makes sense when you think of a small town. The center fire department's going to be right there in the center of town, and now we have the cannon there. Then we moved up into the buildings. Let's see where, I don't even know the name of it. The game store is now, but Tinker and Smithy's. That's right. They moved up from Frog Hollow, right? Weren't they? Were they down there below? They were actually Tinker and Smithy's, the one that's there now.
Yes.
They were on Route 7 across from, in the Countryside Plaza is where they started
All right,
originally.
and then moved up.
So anyway, that was Gove's photography. They actually had a photography store there. And I said to my husband, he and I came from roots, didn't have a lot of money. I said, but how did your parents afford to have family pictures taken there? But they survived for quite a while. So then coming past that, I can't remember. My husband's not here, so I can tell a story. I can't remember, but I think it was the IGA store that was where 4th and Goal is now. But when
Spa.
What?
The spa.
The spa. All right, that's right. Okay. But what my memory is, okay, you have to remember, I started dating my husband in junior high, so that, or first year of high school. So we have quite a history. But when I first started thinking, what are the stories that I could tell? I remember seeing him across the street. He's a lovely Italian fellow, okay? This would have been back in the 50s. And he had on a white shirt for some reason with short sleeves on it. They were rolled up with his pack of cigarettes. Oh my goodness sakes alive, just kind of hanging out there. And I guess that attracted me because that was the first story that I could remember about Middlebury. So that's terrible. So then if we hop across, he's a very wonderful man, and he doesn't smoke cigarettes anymore, so that's the good part about it. Hopped across, what's the Frog Hollow there? Golly, what was in that building? Oh, that was Ruby's, okay? Now, were there stories before about penny candy and going to the Ben Franklin? But Ruby's was really where the penny candy was. That's where you stopped. So the big joke was you might have been given money to go get your lunch. And many kids didn't get their lunch. They came back and stopped at Ruby's on the way home and got their penny candy. So. Or before you went to the movies, you stopped at Ruby's and then went across the street to the campus. Yeah, so. And then the next building next door to us was called the Gray Shop. And as they mentioned before, that was where you went and bought nice fancy clothes. It was kind of like the Clays of the early days. So this spot here, I don't know if anybody's mentioned it, but was Farrell's men's clothing. And that was also a center. I mean, you had very nice men's clothes here, but it was also a place where people came in and chatted. They're very much the center of town. I'm going to lose it as I start moving up the street. The Rexall drugstore again. Some of my first dates with John was having a soda. And what I remember was that he ended up finishing what he was doing and then eating, and he was ready to leave, and I wasn't finished. And I had never stopped that. When he's finished, he gets up and leaves. I said, oh, well, that's life, you know. Some things never change. Still love him through it all. So. And then, of course, the Vermont bookshop, Calvi's, we were talking about that, the soda space there. That was quite unique, Mrs. Calvi. You know, there were some other Italians in town. She was one of them, so not a lot of them. And then, of course, we've had all the stories about Mike's Five and Dime. It was just unbelievable what you could find in that. There was a lot of dust. He didn't ever dust his things. And I was a sewer, and I remember going in there and the zippers, any length you wanted, any color you wanted, but oh my goodness sakes alive, they were quite dusted over. But wonderful coloring books. Oh, I mean, it was phenomenal. Then I have to move up to Lazarus department store, which is now defunct. It's had many versions, but when I was a child, Lazarus was where you went for good shoes. And Stan Lazarus took care of you. And my mother believed that you had to have good shoes all the time. I mean, now we walk around in our bare feet and sloppy things, but you had to have good shoes.
And Stan was just the most wonderful person to be with. He made you feel wonderful. You knew he did a good job. He cared about your feet. And we've all heard stories of Stan was really an amazing person. He had a faith called the Jewish faith, but we didn't think about those things back then, that was anything different. And he just did so many good things around this town. But he was just somebody here that cared about people and did wonderful things. So, and I can remember as I grew older and did come back to town, he used to give us a box of chocolates. And I thought, why did we deserve a box of chocolate? I think he probably bought cases of chocolates and gave them to everybody else. But it was just wonderful. He never forgot about how important it is to give. And he was very much an important part of our town. Then I do remember the post office a little bit, but then I remember the community house, which is now the music center in town, and it's so exciting, that transition. But for me, the community house, when I was young, and we were talking about the recreation program of the past, when I was probably 3, 4, 5, I don't know how much it cost my mother to send me there, but in the morning you'd go and you played in the lower level of the community house. And it was a huge lawn that then goes down to where the fire station is now. The fire station ended up, when they put the addition on, buying a portion from the community house there. Because where the new addition of the fire station is now, they had one of those circular things. What are they called? Merry-go-round. Oh, it was just heavenly to be down there and go on that merry-go-round. It was just the living end. I was just living big. And then for refreshments, you got to walk up the hill, lovely lilac hedge along Seymour Street, so you were it was just comfortable feeling. And then you went back into the basement and you were given graham crackers. That was the biggest deal in the world. I sometimes wonder about where I was, but life was simple and life was happy, and it was just a real blessing. I had the opportunity to go to the Congregational Church in my younger days, and that was a pillar in this town and has been. It's a lot of wonderful memories there. Let's see, where else? Oh, well, we might as well go right up to Chipman Hill from there. How about that? Because my husband tells me stories of skiing down Chipman Hill. There was a ski jump there, and then you could actually ski down there. And yes, there was parking up at the top by the time I got to that point. So that was great. Let's see. I think that, coming back down through town, my very youngest days, I can remember where Edgewater Galleries is now at the intersection of Merchants Row and Main Street. That was the First National, a grocery store. And again, when you think about it, the grocery store is right in town. You know, the church, St. Stephen's Church, the Congregational Church, then St. Mary's. It was a small town in how much we have kind of grown and spread out. And I think we will continue to grow and spread out. I have great faith in this town. So that was a grocery store, and I can remember going up and down the aisles of that, and that was wonderful. And then next to the grocery store, at a little bit later date, that was where Baker's Jewelry was, a little teeny niche. Edgewater, or actually it was Ski House, bought out that little extra part, but Baker's Jewelry store was there for many, many years. That was where you went and had. And then as you move down, we mentioned earlier today about the Waits Furniture Store, which was on that level. So what now is 51 Main was a huge furniture store. So think of having it was a huge space with loads of things. So that's where you got your furniture. And I don't know if they've mentioned this evening, but this afternoon, how originally the lower Main Street was a level down, so the basement of underneath Waits and all the Battelle was at a lower level. And it wasn't until this bridge was built that it was brought up to the level it is, and now it was the second floor of those buildings are now the storefront buildings. I thought interesting to remember that. So, And yes, where 51 Main used to be, and that's changed a number of times, and something else will come in there. I have great faith. So I think that's enough meandering around.
The Waite's furniture store, funeral parlors come up a couple of times today. But I remember when we were kids, when we'd walk across the bridge, there was this pipe that came out from the basement that went into the creek, and we used to say that that's where all the blood came out. Well, we've heard from people who had stories from way back. Is there anyone who has a more current story they'd like to say? Okay. So identify yourself.
I'm Fran Putnam. The first time I alighted in this town was in 1964 when I went to interview at Middlebury College. And my mother had been going to the summer school, the language school, for a couple of years already, and she wanted me to apply to Middlebury. I was not interested in applying to Middlebury, so I remember my interview was in the library, and we had an interview, and the lady said to me, she said, now if you really want to go to Middlebury, you're going to have to let me know. You don't sound that excited. So it turned out, no, I did not go to Middlebury. I went to Swarthmore instead, where I met my husband, but we landed back here in 1966. My mother was still at the language school, and I came up with my two younger sisters and spent the summer here. And our favorite place to go was then Liane's place, which is now Schaefer's. But I wanted to say something a little more current. How many of you remember Ben and Jerry's here? Okay, it was right around the corner. I can't remember which building.
It was in the Star Mill.
Yeah.
In front of the Star
Okay, in the Star Mill. Okay, so I wanted to, since my son is here, one of his birthday parties was, we invited 8 or 9 boys when he was about, 9 or 10 years old, and we ordered a Vermonster. Does anybody here remember the Vermonsters?
30 scoops, right?
I can't remember. It was a big bowl, like a huge bowl, and then they would just put 10 scoops of this and of that, and then whipped cream and 3 kinds of toppings, and then they just said, here, dig in, and everybody got a spoon, and we just started to eat. Did we ever finish it, Benj? So, unfortunately, there was Ben and Jerry's, but there was also Calvi's, and I think Ben and Jerry's sort of put Calvi's out of business, the ice cream. And then Ben and Jerry's left, so then we were left with nothing. But then the other thing is also more recent, but a few years ago we had a gigantic snowstorm here, and right here on the Battelle Bridge, there was so much snow that you had to walk in the street. So we have a friend, David Rosenberg, who's a professor at Middlebury, used to walk from Washington Street through Middlebury every single day to his office. And this is a story he tells. He was walking in the street, and the snowplow came along. And if any of you know David Rosenberg, he had to jump up into the snowbank all the way up as high as it would go. Hanging there like this, while the snowplow went by, and then he clambered down and walked to the college. So those are my 2 stories about recent Middlebury.
I think it's pretty interesting, the composition of all, hearing the story walk, right, of all the different types of stores that used to be downtown and in and around Middlebury, and what it's transformed into. It's a pretty different makeup. You know, you think of drugstores and shoe stores and clothing stores and pharmacies or supermarkets, and how it's changed. We got hair salons and gift shops and pop-up shops. It's pretty interesting. Is there anybody else that has a story to share or something they'd like to talk about? Yeah,
Marita. Here you go.
I want to state your name for the record.
Yeah, I will. I'm Marita Schine, and we as a family are rather recent additions to Middlebury. 33 years ago. I would have never thought that, that would be my hometown, but it has become that way. And I want to just very briefly not just talk about what I remember from where the comic store was when down in the basement of Neat Repeats, I think, for a while. But I wanted to really remember all the wonderful people that our four children connected to. We came from close to New York City, near the Bronx, with 3 small children, and it was really the first time that they could just be in town. There was a little cohort around the neighborhoods, and then when they got older, they could go to the library all on their own. They probably spent more time with Dick Thodal than at home, making movies, and it was safe to make movies at night and crawl around dressed in black with harnesses and climb up house fronts. Some of it I didn't even know, but I always had that feeling that people looked out. And once in a while, when they did something that was a little hairy, I would get a call or somebody would mention it at the supermarket and say, did you know that Tobias does this or that? And then, I would have that talk with him. And I'm sure we all have these stories as well of a very connected town that looks out for each other.
One thing I have to mention, there was a number of people have mentioned Stan Lazarus and what a wonderful man he was. And I don't know if my wife Sally wants to say anything, but she worked for Stan years ago. And
well, I think people have really spoken a lot.
Oh, okay. I had to bring it up. But.
Oh, you were wonderful, yeah.
So I was talking to Judy earlier, and Judy was a friend of my sister Stina's when they were younger. Anything that you'd like to say about your recollections, or it's okay. It's okay. Okay. Well, who would like to contribute something?
I have a question. At the beginning, you started by asking, what's the longevity of the people here in this room? I think we went back about 70 years, right? About 70 years ago.
Yeah, I think that was the...
So if there's something that you think of in that 70, 60, 50, 40-year time frame that was transformative for Middlebury, just the one thing that you feel like changed Middlebury, whether it was culturally or economically or whatever. Is there any one thing that stands out in anybody's mind?
I'll give an example. There used to be, now we've got the roundabout right up here, but back in the day we had the dummy. Yes. Who remembers the dummy?
You describe it?
Okay. so the dummy, the dummy was nowhere near as complex as this. It was really kind of like a Cupid doll it was like a big milk can with a
flowers in it.
Did it have flowers in it? Yeah. Okay. And so what you would do is, like on Saturday night, you'd come up the street, and then when you went around the dummy, you'd get on it and lay some rubber, and then go back and go out to the root beer stand, then come back and do it again. And people would do it all night long, Saturday night.
So wait, where was that?
It was right up where it's pretty much where the roundabout is now. I mean, to pinpoint it.
Yeah, there wasn't any circle.
That was, there was because you would go up and you have the choice, of going south.
No bridge there.
Right.
Yeah, right.
Fixed building.
Yeah. So you came up and the road kind of naturally, split into College Street and South Main Street. And this was before that Y, but, and it was kind of, I'd say it was right by the town offices. Anybody, was it right across from From the Benjamin Brothers building? Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and there it was. It was about this big. And I think that the chief may have had it out at his house afterwards. And, and since I mentioned the chief, earlier there was some discussion about the chief not carrying a gun because he was a convicted felon, and which I understand was the truth. But I used to be afraid of the chief, kind of, because he was a. But then when he got older, we got to be really good friends, and he came to our wedding. It was great.
He was a wonderful man.
Oh yeah, yeah.
He was just fabulous. We would
Oh
hang
yeah.
out by the bed and play. And,
Yeah.
Time to go home, kids. We would go.
Yeah, he took care of everybody, and he would. I did some roofing on his house once, and he said, if you were thinking of going fishing, you might think about going up into the Notch Road, and you know where that little building is up in there? He says, if you thought about going fishing, you might want to go there tomorrow morning. And so I go up there, and I got my limit in about 20 minutes. And,
So you could get back to roofing?
yeah, so I come back and I give him 6 brook trout, and I take the other half. But he knew where they were stocking, so that's that. So I think that's what it was all about, because I wasn't that good. And he did his potatoes. He ate potatoes 3 meals a day, and he was up at 4 in the morning, and he would take his false teeth out, put them right next to him on the seat of his truck. And he'd drive around 4 in the morning with a big wad of Red Man in his mouth. And so he told me about that. It really didn't matter that he didn't have a gun. He said, because if you're in police work, back then everybody was a resistor, and if you couldn't take them, you had no business being in police work. So.
I had always heard that I could always heard that nobody in town could handle him when he was drunk, so they made him chief of police. But he indeed was a wonderful guy. I got to know him a little bit from the misspent hours at the pool room.
Sure, come on up.
It's a second-hand story.
Yeah.
So I have 2 stories. One is from Arlen Foote, who lives in Shoreham. He comes to Project. He's a wonderful man, and he tells me the story that he went to the movies with his horse. So he would come up from Shoreham with his horse from the farm, tie it up. I would love to hear if somebody remembers that. There must have been poles, something where you could tie up your horse. And then they went to the movies, and then he went back home. On a horse. Can you? I just love that story. Arlen Foote. My story is more nature-oriented, because one morning, I look out of the window, we live on Elm Street, actually, and one of the older gentlemen, he remembers that town ended there. Like Exchange Street, it was just fields, because he goes like, he remembered that. And so we live on Elm Street. Our house is about 100 years old. And then suddenly I look into the window and I'm like, what is that? A beaver. A beaver right in town. And so it waddled through. Greg's Meat Market was the old Greg's, and it waddled through, and the beaver knew apparently where to go. He went right to the river. We were stopping the traffic, but it was just so cool, a beaver. And then we talked to the police, and apparently the beavers still come to the falls, and then I think it's the rite of spring. They go around. They look for a way around the falls because they want to go somewhere new.
Sally and I were counting bats at Marshall and Jane Eddy's house a few weeks ago, and Jane said that they remember, Sally, she said those pipes that they have there, that was a hitching post? She said that was a hitching post from the town. Who's next?
It's fun how the stories about stores and businesses have turned into memories about people who were part of them. From the Lions Club, I've been a member of the Lions Club for, I don't know, 15, 17 years or so. And if you want to hear stories about the local characters, you can go to one of those meetings and hear all about them. It's a little different of a club now than it was back then, but you think of the likes of like Chet Ketchum and Soupy Peck and all those guys who, Chet was a lawyer in town and Soupy ran a glass store, right? Yeah. Yeah. Fun stories.
Sure, Dave.
Well, everybody probably heard enough from me earlier, but it seems to me that this would be incomplete without an alibi story. And so, could I see a show of hands of how many people actually visited the alibi? Okay, that's good. Well, the Addison Independent absolutely refused to print the name Alibi. It was always the Mill Street Bar Room. Yeah, but we knew better. So one afternoon, I just went down. It was only like 4 o'clock, and I went in for exactly one beer. And the place was pretty deserted. There was a group of, I think, 4 guys at the pool table, and then there was the bartender, myself, and this absolute behemoth of a guy. I never saw him before or since. He was just enormous. And he was sitting there, and he had a, sort of a universal stubble all over his head, and, big jowls, and he was just kind of sitting there. And there was some backstory here. I didn't know anything about it. I was just minding my own business. And all of a sudden, one of the guys at the pool table turned around, and with the fat end of the pool cue, he hit this guy in the head, right over the ear, just as hard as he could. Whack! The guy said, "Don't do that." And you never saw a room empty as quickly. I was right with the rest of them. I got out of there. I have no idea what happened next, but that became a byword in our family. Don't do that.
That's great. You never found out who it was? Haven't seen him since? Anybody else? Yeah, Bethany.
So I'm Bethany Barry, and I have not been here as long, but my husband and I came up here. Well, actually, what should I say? So my divorce lawyer and I came up to Middlebury because he had gone to Middlebury, and so he was an alum, and we came to a reunion, and the store that I remember from then was Wild Mountain Thyme. And Middlebury seemed lovely, and then my divorce lawyer and I parted ways, fortunately, and I married somebody else, and we came up to Vermont for several years, and we were looking at places around Basin Harbor and Virgins. My husband wanted to be on the water, which I thought was sort of a waste of time. But, I wanted to get out of New Jersey, so actually anywhere in Vermont would have been fine. But we moved to Lake Dunmore, and I opened a store in Middlebury, which was below Ben & Jerry's, and that was how it was known. And it was at the end of that porch, and it was great because people would find it. This was before GPS, and people had to really sort of figure out where things were. And I had people come in who would say, "Oh, I remember this when it was the Alibi. I threw up right over there."
We won't do a round robin about where people threw up in Middlebury. Anybody else? No?
So thank you, everyone, all of the storytellers, our hosts, and all of you for coming. So we have a few minutes for people to look at the displays, and then we're going to start picking up the chairs because this is a pop-up event. And things that pop up have to pop down again. So we're going to start our popping down in about 10 or 15 minutes. So enjoy continuing to talk with one another, share stories, look at the exhibits, and maybe we'll do this again.